listening to The Starting Zone, a podcast about World of Warcraft and the people who play it. And now, here are your hosts.
Well, hello and welcome to The Starting Zone, the podcast about World of Warcraft and the people who play it. Today is August 9th, 2022, and my name is Spencer Downey. Thank you so much for listening and subscribing to the podcast. I'm joined today, as always, by my co-host, Jason Lucas. Jason, how are you on this second week of Season 4?
Spencer, hello. I'm doing well. We are recording a bit early today, in the day, and we have a bit of longer than normal maintenance, so we do not have, weekly reset stuff that we don't know about. We haven't had vaults yet or anything like that. Just as a little disclaimer here, but I'm doing well. Season 4 has been it's been productive for me. Like I think I had a really good first week of the season, which is nice. I got pretty much what I was kind of bargaining for at the level I was approaching it. So that's good. I mean, we've seen a lot of stuff start shifting around already. I expect we'll see a lot more. We got it's also just like there's so much stuff shifting around the game everywhere. We should get a new alpha build a little bit later. We got a pretty big one last week. We got the classic realm consolidation today, and Wrath on PTR and all this other stuff. Like it's a lot, and I've been playing a lot of WoW as a result.
Yeah, it's been a heck of a week in playing WoW. I definitely spent the majority of my week either in M+ dungeons or raid, just spamming stuff away, trying to get character power, and experiencing what sort of this past week has been like when it came to Season 4. It was an interesting roller coaster, I would say, which isn't uncommon for the start of a new season. I think there's always things that they need to work out at the very beginning of a season. I do feel like their largest issue coming into Season 4, which it has been in the past with other seasons, is balancing, but more importantly in Season 4, balancing across content. So something like, and I actually tweeted out to this effect, we ran a 22 junkyard in time without real issue with like 6 minutes to spare. But then we ran like a 50-minute Lower Karazhan 16 because we just could not seem to manage to get through it. I ran multiple Lower Karas. I got closer to timing them, but unless I was running like a 15 with a group that really knew absolutely everything they were doing, there was no way for us to actually get through that dungeon efficiently in time, an 8, which is pretty rough. The fact that it was in that situation. It wasn't the only one. There were other unique situations. I know, Jason, you had some experiences with Medivh last night inside Upper Karazhan, where that boss in particular is just a little, overtuned.
Yeah, hopefully with reset it'll be better because it did catch a nerf. I felt like I did way more keystones than I normally do on a typical week because early in the season, people want to go. We got new goals to hit and stuff. So I ended up doing 8 to fill out my vault. I did everything except Lower Kara. I just didn't go into one. I heard so many horror stories about it. I'm like, it's just not worth our time. Like, there's other things we can do. This is going to get balanced down. So I wasn't really in a big rush. Like I didn't even hit like 1400 or anything because I have, a hole in my dungeon completions. But I had a similar experience with Junkyard. Like we stepped into Junkyard 17. It was the first key that we did all week, and we crushed it. We had several minutes left on the timer. It felt smooth all the way through. Junkyard is a bit of a special case because those bots that you pick up, like the buffs are so strong that if you manage to hold them for a significant amount of time, and by that I mean just don't die, like you just crush through that place. And the route is pretty straightforward without doing any skips or anything. So that felt great. I'm like, okay, we're off to a good start here. But I had already heard some horror stories about Lower Kara and stuff. But like I said, I ended up doing every other dungeon. Pretty much most of the stuff felt fine in that 15 to 17 range, except Upper Kara, and really specifically Medivh. Shade of Medivh just was extremely punishing. It's a hard fight anyway, right? and you need a lot of interrupts to keep it under control. One of the tricks that Prot Warrior used to have back when in Legion, when we actually did that dungeon as content, like current content, was you had a legendary that gave you double charges of Spell Reflect, and that made a huge difference because you'd reflect Medivh's piercing missiles back at him like basically every other time, and it did so much damage to him. And it seems like the reflect damage isn't as high. So, if you have like a prop paladin or something, you have a lot more options for interrupting him. But interrupting him is a huge part of that fight, and Flame Wreath was just doing so much damage, and that just cascades because if somebody dies during it, you probably have heavy dots from the Inferno bolts, and then if somebody dies during Flame Wreath, then you wipe. They don't really design dungeons like that anymore, and Return to Karazhan was like a special kind of experiment that was sort of developed in parallel with Keystone Dungeons. And Keystone Dungeons are so much more refined now than they were 6 years ago, right? So that boss just really felt like an outlier, and everything else I did felt basically okay. I mean, first week of season 3, I was not timing 17s, 16s, 15s, at all, let alone comfortably. So obviously, like, the ramp up is not as big of a deal coming from like season 3 to season 4 as we've seen from season 2 to season 3 or season 1 to season 2. It's a bit more accessible, but there are some weird tuning outliers for sure. I mean, we'll talk a bit later about a slate of Keystone Dungeon changes that we're seeing coming in with Reset this week. I don't suspect that they're done. I think there's still going to be stuff that's going to stick out, but overall, like the dungeon pool is not as odious as I was maybe afraid of for the most part. Like, tuning issues aside, I don't think Upper Kara is a bad run. The Warlords dungeons I didn't find them to be anywhere near as bad as I was maybe fearing. And I think, Mechagon and Tazavesh are pretty good examples of modern Keystone dungeons. So that was cool. And, the affix, I mean, I think so, I've seen some people kind of grouse about like the seasonal affix. It's not fun. I think it's fine. It's very straightforward. Which is good because we are essentially like relearning a significant part of this dungeon pool, and players who didn't play Keystone Dungeons in Legion or BFA are learning a lot of new dungeons, which I think is enough like very complicated layers. And Shrouded is just predictable and powerful, and stacking up that stat that you want throughout the course of the dungeon, it makes a big difference. So I think it's fine. I don't like at this point in Shadowlands life cycle, I don't really want an elaborate affix that I really have to plan around. We're also seeing some tuning changes to Zul'Gumux, which we'll talk about. I mean, we've seen them already, but they're keeping an eye on that because the mini boss Nathrezim is kind of nasty. Will be less nasty going forward. But that's great. I think just okay. Here's a mob. It transforms into a Nathrezim. It has a couple different abilities. You kill that, you get enemy forces percentage and a really good buff. I think that's all I really need for this. A bit of tuning is necessary, obviously, and also, as I kept trying to remind myself and other people I was playing with, like, this is as hard as it will ever be. Like, we're just ripping huge upgrades right away. Unlike even previous seasons where we have that 1 week ramp up, right? Like, we're getting full, max end of dungeon and, full vault rewards, assuming the vault works right later today. So that's cool. It should be a much smoother way up. I mean, I'm replacing my set pieces with dungeon drops and grabbing, 10, 15 item levels from the creation catalyst, on a piece. Like, that's cool. That's stuff that we haven't. Normally we have a much more protracted process of like, okay, you have that ramp up week. And so it's like really 2 weeks till you start pulling really big upgrades. And season 3 was like, it's 2 months until you have creation catalyst and all that. So I think there's a lot of good stuff here. I actually had, to be honest with you, I had a lot more fun than I was maybe afraid that I was not going to have or something. Like, I think, Heroic Raid and those kind of like mid-teens keys felt really fun this week, and I pulled some nice upgrades. So I'm ready to keep that going.
Yeah, I think for me, this past week has felt a little bit like I had goals and objectives for where I think this season 4 should be at, which I expressed on the show. As far as I very much feel like because there's a 3-week period of downtime between when we see this raid again for the next couple of cycles. Well, two more weeks. So basically this week, next week, and then the week after we would see it again. It felt like if a team was currently clearing a certain tier of content, they should be able to go in and clear that same level of content this week in that week. And that's where things should be balanced at, because doing any kind of progression just means that you essentially lose any of that progress you've made, because you then go 2 and a bit weeks before seeing the raid again. So the likelihood that your raiders are as familiar and as comfortable as they were, just a couple of days before when they were doing content normally, you'd see, have a couple days off and then you're back into your raid days and you're back doing the content again. You just lose that progression, that momentum that you had as a team when you have this large of a break between the content. And so I was a little disappointed. I was very happy with Heroic tuning. I think Heroic was where it should be. I was very glad that the Heroic teams I know who were clearing Heroic were able to progress through it and, see the bosses and actually not have to do too much progression and learning, just sort of get updated on your brain as far as like, oh yeah, this is how Zymox works and what we do with seeds and where the teleports go, like that being the big thing. But on the Mythic front, that was a different case. When it came to the Mythic raid, we very much saw Sludge Fist still being a DPS check, which, props to them for trying to maintain that as a thing. And we still saw Stone Legion Generals being a heavily technical fight that a lot of teams struggled with. And then Sardonathrius was just basically undoable for the first couple of days because there was so much lag for mechanics and whatnot. And they did hotfix midweek to try and help with that lag and those problems that were happening. But I don't think they hit the mark for Mythic, in my opinion. And I think what really defines that and makes that clear is there were only 33 teams that managed to kill Mythic Sire last week. There were only 36 teams on top of that who managed to kill Mythic Stone Legion Generals. And I think that is very clear that when you have less than, 70 raid teams being able to kill the last 2 bosses of Fated, and then you have a 3-week break before you see those bosses again, have a chance to do them again, that's not ideal. That is pretty negative overall. For teams that were regularly clearing Jailer, like our team was going in farming for 4 or 5 weeks on Jailer and clearing out that entire raid, and to not be able to go in and clear through, it was so much so that when we killed Sludge Fist, went upstairs with an hour and a half of raid time left to Stone Legion Generals and went, do we really want to start this? There's only been 69 teams who have killed this boss. Do we really want to start this progression? And most people voted against it because it just wasn't worth. We knew we probably weren't going to kill it because all the teams that did manage to kill it spent hours on it. So it was like, all right, well, let's just, fine, we just won't do it. It's not tuned properly to where it should be, so we're just not going to do it. I think that's unfortunate when not just our team, but many teams had the exact same decision because it just wasn't tuned to the point where you felt like you could actually knock it over in your normal raid week. It's that tricky thing of if you're gonna give people 10 bosses to kill and you can only kill them once every 3 weeks, you should make them killable in that week. Like they shouldn't be something that you have to raid, 25 hours a week or whatever it is to be able to kill in that week. Like even Liquid, who was in there, spent 6.5 hours in raid on their first day and didn't clear it and had to go back and spend more time trying to get through it. And you're like, if the best of the best are up there, wiping to these fights and struggling to get through these fights, you probably overtuned this again, guys. Again. Yeah,
it's just not. I mean, there were, like, when it was content, there were somewhere in the neighborhood of, like, 2,200 Mythic Sire kills. So you're telling me, like, 1.5% of those players are back to do Fated Mythic, like, the first week? I don't know. I mean, obviously, there's been a lot of drop-off since Castle Nathria came out. So, I guess we got to account for that. Maybe it's closer to 2 or 3%, but it's like that just feels wrong, right? And I mean, Heroic really didn't feel that way. Like, we never would full clear a Heroic raid on the first week of a raid release. That, we'd be progging a new Heroic raid tier for 2 months, a month and a half, 2.5 months, maybe longer than that, right? And I mean, we didn't breeze through. It did take Tuesday, Wednesday, and like an hour on Sunday to kill all 10 bosses, but in a lot of cases, we were just struggling with the Fated Affix, like not really understanding what it was asking of us or like how to use it well. And once we kind of started doing that, I mean, once we figured out, okay, we can get like 25 stacks of the thing on Sludge Fist and everybody's doing 50% increased damage for 25 seconds or whatever it is, like, yeah, that boss, dies really fast. Sun King was a little nasty because that's a chaotic fight anyway. And then the Affix was throwing just another layer of chaos on top of it. But, in general, it was like, okay, yeah, right. How did we do this before? Okay, it's this. Denathrius was a little more obnoxious because it's an obnoxious fight anyway. And then there's another ad that you have to pay attention to and keep interrupted and kill it and, make sure it doesn't explode on you. That, I don't think that fight needs that layer. And we were still running into stuff where it's like, okay, we better hold DPS because we got to make sure we get this one more cleansing pain at the end so that people can get into the middle. Like, that mechanic just sucks, and it sucked 2 years ago, and it sucks now, regardless of tuning or anything else involved in a raid. I guess it's okay on normal because you only get 4 stacks, so it's pretty easy to get everybody into the safety zone without having to do anything weird. I just that fight is really not my favorite. It's and then I'm thinking about doing Sylvanas later this week, and it's like these end bosses are just too obnoxious to be fun. I think Jailer is actually much better than either of these two, but. I think other than that, they nerfed Stone Legion Generals and it caught huge nerfs on Heroic, and it's actually like very easy on Heroic now. Like even Wicked Blade doesn't splash damage, so you don't have to do like the primary mechanic of the way that fight used to work, which is kind of weird. But overall, like for me, that's kind of what I wanted was for us to be able to clear through Heroic Nathria week 1.
Yeah.
So that, I feel like that's dialed in. And yeah, I mean, there was all kinds of weirdness with the mythic tuning. And I don't know. It's kind of that thing that I always say that they can't come in too low because then they don't really want to buff stuff. But like.
Well, in this case, like I don't think there was a too low. I'm just putting that out there. For season 4, there wasn't a too low.
Right. Yeah. I don't think so either. I think players of all skill and skill levels and difficulty targets would be happy to have something that was like too easy and you're just collecting loot and watching the numbers go up.
Yeah.
Like, that is, and I think in a lot of cases that is where we are, just not at the very top end. Which, I don't know. Hopefully we'll either see some more changes to it or. Within another rotation of just gear going out that it'll be trivialized, but yeah, way more than, not quite 40 teams should have killed Fated Mythic Denathrius last week.
Yeah. And it's just that case of even the penultimate boss, even Stone Legion Generals, you're talking about less than 70 teams killing Stone Legion Generals. And you're like, okay, like this is probably not what you want.
No, I mean, those bosses should be dead.
Yeah. So it's, and I don't know. I was just disappointed that they didn't hit the mark on that tuning. Feeling the tuning difference between dungeons, which we already talked about a bit, also felt pretty strange. And hopefully a lot of that's getting resolved. We'll talk more about, like you said, the some of the dungeon nerfs that are taking place. I certainly have some opinions on those, which I want to share. So that'll be interesting to hear about. But other than that, I think that's what I got up to. I got up to like 1650 IO. Timed a whole bunch of keys, didn't time 2 or 3 keys. Some of the funny stories I had, one of the ones was this new affix, the big boss mob in Lower Karazhan, which I'm sure you'll experience soon, summons a bat, and that bat does mind control. It does a hypnosis on a player and mind controls them. So Zul'Gurmuk's his location in Lower Karazhan is backstage. So you do the stage event, you go backstage, and there's one mob. You clear out the normal trash you do when you immediately go backstage. And then there's one mob before you actually head down the ramp to underneath the stage area in the orchestra pit where you fight next. And that is Zul'Gurmuk's. Well, his mind control went off, and it went off backstage. And something you might not consider is what else is backstage? Well, backstage is all of the other performers from all of the other events that can take place on the stage. And obviously they're going to rotate which act is happening, which performance is happening on stage each week. So backstage was the Big Bad Wolf and Dorothy and all of those characters. And I got mind controlled by the Hypnosis Bat because it didn't get CC'd. And all of those characters backstage are friendly to you. And so guess what happens when you get mind controlled backstage by Zolgamux? All of those things attack you. Big Bad Wolf leaped at me and started meleeing me. Like, they all started attacking me. It was the craziest thing to see backstage.
That's pretty great, actually. Yeah. Like, it sucks that happened to you specifically.
Oh, I mean, if you do the mechanic right, you're fine.
Yeah. You just stun the thing or whatever. You could lock it down. But man, that's pretty great. I don't know if that was like intended, but that's a pretty funny interaction.
It's a hilarious interaction. I literally had that terrifying moment where I was like, oh, I got mind controlled. And you just see Big Bad Wolf turn and start running at you. And you're like, oh my God. So yeah, I appreciate whichever dev came up with that placement, and whether or not that was intentional or not, I thought that was very clever. And it made me chuckle,
like
for
being
sure.
back in Burning Crusade, Karazhan.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. So that was fun. All right, but let's. What else did I have last week? Did you have anything else last week you wanted to cover real quick?
Well, just a couple things, because man, I just played so much WoW last week, and I think I'm gonna plateau a little bit because I hit 70 on the Burning Crusade Classic Warrior, which felt really nice. I think that was like Thursday I finished it up, so that was like. I started the prior Monday, so it was about 10 days. I didn't play every day even. The buff felt great. It felt really good, and I'm glad that I got it all done on TBC data before Wrath pre-patch comes in, because I wanted to play that experience. And I had a great time just questing. Like I just quested all the way up. It felt very lucrative. It felt like very consistent progression. And I play in a busy server on NA. There's plenty of traffic. I always had people to group up with to do elite quests and stuff. I found a full group to do Ring of Blood with all the way through, which was great because that was a huge weapon upgrade that carried me from like 67 all the way through the end. Just a lot of fun. I think that content is great, still really holds up. It's really a lot of the Burning Crusade stuff is the exact same on live as it was back then in terms of like the quest storylines and objectives and how all that stuff plays out. It's not that much different. And I think they had obviously learned a lot of lessons by that point of development of how to make questing zones and stuff. And then they continue to learn those lessons, but it was cool to see that kind of step forward and play through that stuff again, knowing like what I know now and what we collectively know, and having good resources for builds and information and add-ons. Like, it just improved the experience so much from playing it in 2007, so I really had a good time with that. I'm not going to touch the character now until Wrath Classic comes out, but I have some stuff to try to auction house and see if I can make some coin or whatever. But had a great time. Made some new temporary friends, and it was really fun. And then aside from the past, I've also been playing the future because Warrior Talents came in to Alpha last week for Dragonflight, and man. There is so much cool stuff in the Warrior and Prot trees that I'm very pleased. I mean, stances are back, which I kind of hate, but they're going to be low impact, I think, which is kind of the problem. Like, they're very early in the tree, and they're not very compelling kiss curse situations, and it doesn't seem like any abilities are directly tied to what stance is active. So it's not like your stance dancing. It's just like, oh, you can get like an auto attack bonus if you shift into Zerker stance when you're off tanking. Like, it's just, the fantasy isn't there for me, and the benefits are not really there for me. So I saw that headline the trees. It's the first thing you see in the class tree. And I was like, oh, what are we getting into here? But man, there is so much cool stuff in these warrior trees, like Prot, where you can get like 15% leech via talents, plus the thing that converts your rage spend into self-healing. And my favorite thing that I was playing around with on stream was there's a new talent at the very bottom of the Prot tree called Shield Charge, which is, as far as I know, a new ability. I mean, it's similar to other abilities that we've had over the years, but Shield Charge is a long cooldown ability. It's like 45 seconds for a charge ability, but it works like charge, except it stuns your main target for 4 seconds, like old school charge used to do. It cleaves damage onto everything near it with no target cap, and it generates 50 rage. It is the coolest opener that I've seen for Prot Warrior, like maybe ever. It's just one and done. Like you just slam everything. You stun the thing that you run into, and you have a giant rage bomb. Like, it's so satisfying. And in the outdoor world, it was just the cleave damage was just killing stuff. Because I was fighting these like plant monsters, and there'd be one big plant and a couple little plants around them, and you charge the big plant, and everything just explodes. It was great. Very, very happy with a lot of the direction they're going with Warrior and Prot design. So. Obviously a lot of work to do. Like, stuff is still early. There's some stuff that maybe should be moved around for, flexibility, but I think the important thing for me that I'm looking at is like, what is the design intent? Like, what do they want us to be doing, or what do they want us to be choosing between? That, I think it's more important than how the actual thing plays out right now. And they're presenting a lot of cool and compelling abilities that are going to mix up Warrior gameplay without feeling like it's a completely different class or experience. It's like, it's familiar, but it's just adding some cool layers and some cool decision points in. So I'm thrilled. The more of Alpha I play, the more I just can't wait for it to be out and for it to be the stuff that we're doing with this game.
It just makes me look forward to the pre-patch where we get all of the new talents and everything, but we're doing all the old content, so it's sort of this weird sort of learning period. Yeah. Typically that's a little bit of an intimidating time, but I think in this case, it's actually going to be pretty hilariously fun with some of the builds and concepts that people are going to come up with. And since the content will be very old hat, I think it'll be a really good learning process to sort of find your feet in the system, even though we don't have all of our talent points or whatever yet at a lower level. So,
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, you'll still have plenty of talent points to have some flexibility and come up with some cool builds and have some interesting choices. So, yeah, I think it's going to be one of the more fun pre-patch windows we've seen, because like Shadowlands was so weird, right? Because we had all this stuff turned off, like Azerite stuff got turned off and everything like that, but we didn't have any new stuff yet. You didn't have Covenant abilities or whatever. In this case, like, I presume we're going to lose our Covenant abilities, like baseline, and maybe they even shut off legendaries on it. They might do that as you level up, but like in the talent trees are stuff that are Covenant abilities, or they are legendary abilities, like that stuff is in there, and you can kind of customize your build around whatever fits your style. So, normally there is that kind of trepidation of like, pre-patch is going to be so weird. What am I going to do without X, Y, and Z?
Yeah.
For this one, for me, I can't wait, man. There's so much cool stuff in there to dig into and play around with and see how it works, like in some kind of content, even though it'll be somewhat trivial at that point. Like, pre-patch is, I'm always kind of like biting my nails, but this time it's like, bring it on. Let's play around with this new stuff.
Yeah. All right. With that, let's jump into what's going on this week in World of Warcraft. Okay, so there's some big questions around the events this week. This week is the Shadowlands Dungeon event, which is quest to complete 4 dungeons on Mythic difficulty, obviously Shadowlands dungeons. What we don't know is, does the current season of dungeons count as Shadowlands dungeons? We aren't sure about that yet. Is Lower Karazhan a Shadowlands dungeon on Mythic Plus? Yes, no, question mark?
I gotta think if it's a Keystone dungeon, it counts as a Shadowlands dungeon.
I would hope so, but...
maybe it's supposed to, but it won't. Like, we can't play right now. Yeah. So I assume that if you do Mythic Zeros or Keystones, you'll be okay for this, but that might need to get hotfixed. We'll see.
Yeah, and it rewards a cache of heroic treasures, and we don't know what exactly dungeon those heroic treasures are going to be for, whether that's going to be Sepulchre heroic, or it's going to be, Sopho, Sanctum heroic gear, like...
Yeah, my thought is it would be heroic Fated Sanctum gear, since that's the active Fated week. And if it doesn't award Fated heroic, it's kind of pointless. Like, nobody wants heroic loot at this point. You want Fated heroic or better, or at least Fated something. I'd take Fated normal over Fated heroic, right? So, yeah, we don't... Unfortunately, just because of the time of day we're recording this, we don't actually have like all of this info here, but pick up the quest before you start doing dungeons, because there's no downside to doing that, at least.
Yeah.
And if you do keystones, like, you are probably trying to squeeze at least 4 in for your week right now. So you'll probably complete this without doing anything you didn't already want to do. And hopefully you get something cool. I can't imagine it isn't like heroic fated sanctum gear. It would be weird if it wasn't heroic fated, at least.
I mean, I would take heroic fated sepulchre gear if they really had to be Shadowlands themed, if they were doing that or whatever. I don't know, like whatever they're doing.
Right.
Yeah,
like
or whatever right?
the end tier was. Like,
like
as long as it's faded, we'll take it.
Yeah. So be sure, as Jason said, you pick up that quest. The other thing that we all noticed last week is the dungeon quests were for all of the old dungeons that are no longer Mythic Plus dungeons. So unless we see them adding in Lower Karazhan and adding in Grimrail Depot and whatnot to those dungeon quests inside Shadowlands, there might be less of a reason to pick up those quests before you start doing your Mythic Plus rotation. If you are just running Mythic Zeros and whatnot, feel free to head down to the basement of the inn inside Oribos and pick up those quests, because they are good for Anima and Reputation. But yeah, it's a little weird that we didn't get, the new Mythic Plus pool inside that dungeon stuff. I think that would have been really nice.
Yeah, they were cool bonuses. Like, I wouldn't like target them specifically, but it's like, hey, we have this keystone. Oh, look, I get a nice little benefit for having done this. And especially when they doubled up and one dungeon was both quests. And but we never saw Tazafesh quests come in Season 3. We never got those at all, to my recollection, and I would check every week and usually record them for posterity every week. And I don't think that ever happened. So I don't suspect that we will get ones for this season, which is a shame. I think they should, if they could slide them in there, that would be great. But yeah, it looks like you're probably doing those in Dungeon Finder at this point.
Yeah. But otherwise, you can still pick up your weekly quest for a new deal for Zereth Mortis, as well as your Patterns Within Patterns. They still interact and work well together. And the other big thing is those relics. All the Sandworn relics that are there are great for getting those tier set bonuses. So just be sure, if you've had a main character for a long period of time, I actually had this happen earlier this week. I had a guildie who was like, I have this alt, and I have 3 pieces of tier, and I just need my 4th piece, and it's so frustrating because I've been running all this M+, and I can't seem to get a chest to drop. And I was like, do you have any Sandworn relics? Like, probably on my main. And I was like, well, you could just buy a tier set piece. It's not super high eye level, but if you just want the 4 set bonus, you can just buy one with Sandworn relics and then convert it with the creation catalyst. And they're like, really? So yes, by all means, keep in mind that Sandworn relics are still a great way to get your tier set rolling while you're starting to get into M+ and get into trying to get those critical pieces for your character. So definitely use those as well. All right.
Yeah, it's a great thing to do with if you're doing Patterns Within Patterns, do a new deal, right? You'll get patterns done quick. You can do it on a whole bunch of different characters. You get a bunch of Sandworn relics for finishing it, and then you can funnel them to a character that needs to activate a set bonus or whatever. Low item level, but the bonuses don't have an item level. The bonuses are just good.
Yeah. Another funny thing that was happening last week, which I know Blizz is investigating, is multiple tertiaries dropping on one piece of gear. I don't know if you saw any of that, but
I didn't, but I would like to have one of those.
Yeah, you could. There was someone who linked a set of wrists that were socketed with leech, avoidance, and speed. They literally rolled like the whole thing.
That sounds
on one
like
piece of gear.
That sounds like specific, like a piece of gear that would be in a mega dungeon.
Yeah,
right?
doesn't it? Yeah,
like a piece of gear that has all tertiaries on it. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we saw there was someone else got like a neck to drop, and the neck had avoidance and speed, and someone else got a ring to drop that had a socket and leech or something like that. You're like, oh, well, these are, I mean, socket and leech you could see. You could always see socket with something else, but it was just weird to see like leech plus avoidance on the same piece. And you're like, wow, that is a Mondo tertiary roll. So yeah, I know Blizz is looking into that as to, I don't think that was intentional, but it was happening kind of thing. So if you're getting those pieces, hang on to them, because I don't know if Blizz will take them away, but they might stop them from dropping. So the value of them might go up quite a bit. PvP Brawl this week is Cooking Impossible, where basically Nomi is back and he wants you to bring your most dangerous pots and pans to the Valley of the Four Winds for a new brawl in the kitchen. So this is Valley of the Four Winds. Each team has a cooking station, like a kitchen station, and then there's fields with different ingredients that you can go and collect. And the goal is to cook up the most meals before the other team cooks up their most meals, and you can disrupt each other by either taking each other's resources or, stopping other players or obviously killing your other players when it came to slowing down the other team. Or as Jason talks about a lot, just playing defense on the other team's kitchen, just disrupting them as they arrive in the kitchen as much as possible.
Yeah, you can play like kind of goalie in this brawl, which is fun. Like it's all about just scoring at the cook pot, basically, right? Like you got to get your ingredients, get them back and cook it up, and that's how you win. So, you do that sort of simultaneously, like each side is running ingredients and cooking all at the same time. So you don't have this, maybe kind of the back and forth, like attack, defend sort of, mini game that you have inside other BGs or brawls, because it's just more asynchronous. Everybody's doing everything all at once, which means you can get in there and like a pretty decently viable strategy is to just disrupt the other team from scoring. So get in there, root them, stun them, fear them, whatever, keep them off of their cook pot. And that buys your team like significant time to score. So that's pretty cool. This is a fun one. This is the kind of stuff that we talk about. We talk about whatever the brawl is every week. This is the kind of stuff that I like a different game mode, like something that's a big departure from the typical, battleground rotation. This one definitely fits the bill. I haven't done it in a while, and I probably won't do it this week because I just have so much going on. But if you've never done it, you should check it out because it's really fun, and it's kind of lighthearted. It's just different. I mean, it's Nomi, it's Pandaria. It's just a different vibe. So I like it. It's a cool addition.
Yeah. As far as Torghast goes, it is the Chorus of Dead Souls event. So if you're someone who is wanting to do some Torghast this week, maybe you have a character that you leveled up, you're trying to get some currency and on to be able to craft legendaries, things like that. Chorus of Dead Souls is going on. And Jason, what is the Chorus of Dead Souls?
So Chorus of Dead Souls is like all of the monthly Torghast events, holidays, whatever you want to call it. Your first anima power choice, one of your options will be Howling Soul Core, which allows you to assume the form of a Dead Soul Chorus. You transform into one of those big like Geist looking things, those the ghosts, and it replaces your abilities with Maw based spells. It gives you 50% increased damage and healing and 20% increased movement speed, and friendly players can merge with you and add to the chorus. So this one is cool. It's really fun if you're doing it with other people, because if you can all turn into the Dead Soul Chorus and merge and just keep building that up, that's really fun. Solo, I could kind of take or leave it. But it's definitely an option if you're doing Torghast stuff, if you're like leveling that way, or you're doing, I don't know, you need achievements out of there or something. You could break up the routine a little bit this week with this event going on. So just be aware that it's out there.
It always reminds me a bit of the two-headed ogre style thing from WoW, where one head's arguing with the other head and they're all merged together. Yeah, that's what Chorus of Dead Souls event always reminds me of. All right, we have World Boss Valinor, the Light of the Eons, the big Colossus in Bastion. This guy is dropping some memories for your legendaries. Jason, which ones is he dropping for us?
So Valinor's got your ultra good guy classes. So Priest, Paladin, Shaman. You got Archbishop Benedictus, Final Verdict, and Windspeaker's Lava Resurgence. So if you need any of those on a tune, don't forget to get out there and do that. And just keep in mind, as far as we know, Valinor should not be fated this week. So dropping 207 item level gear, probably not really worth your time on that level unless you're looking for like a Mog piece or something. But remember that the fated world boss is going to be tied to whatever raid is fated.
Yeah, so it should be Morgeth, the Tormentor of the Damned, should be fated this week. That's the big Moss Warren in Desmateron, who drops cloth wrist and legs, leather hands and waist, mail hands and feet, plate, waist and legs, and a mastery trinket with a main stat proc. So these things at what is it?
It's like 288 or something.
Yeah, I think it's 288.
Something like that.
Are super, super valuable and worth picking up. So definitely get in there and grab them. Obviously, you can convert those into tier pieces, which is also super attractive. So certainly worth doing. All right, and then of course there's the Guardian Construct Antros inside Zereth Mortis. You can knock him out. That's some 259 gear. If you are in a situation like the person I mentioned where you need tier pieces to sort of fill out your 4 set, again, you have cloth, legs, and head, leather chest, and plate, helm, and chest that all drop off of Antros that can be converted to tier pieces too. So check that out. Okay.
Mythic if you wear mail, go get some Sanguine relics because Antros can't help you.
That's true. That's actually very true. Yeah.
Everybody else gets at least one. Mail gets nothing.
Mail is waist and wrist. Yeah, it's very sad. Okay. Mythic Plus affixes for the week. Fortified, Sanguine, and Grievous. So non-boss enemies have more health and inflict increased damage. When slain, non-boss enemies leave behind a lingering pool of Ichor that heals their allies and damages players. And injured players suffer increasing damage over time until healed. So basically, if you drop below 90% health, you get a Grievous stack. The longer you're below 90% health, the more stacks of Grievous you get, up to 4. Receiving a direct heal removes 1 Grievous stack. Being healed above 90% removes all Grievous stacks. So they're kicking off Season 4 with stuff that very much punishes healers. Last week was rough. Not just because of quaking, but also because we had a Tyrannical with a new raid with a Tyrannical with new dungeons, with bosses that did a lot of AoE damage that wasn't necessarily tuned very well, which we'll talk about in the hotfix notes. Medivh being obviously the most extreme case of that. Yeah, it's bizarre.
Yeah. Tyrannical first week of the season is always a wild ride too, and it just seems to always work out that way. So this is our first look at Fort.
Yeah. So then when it comes to Fort, we obviously have Grievous, which is going to be an equally challenging thing because now you have trash mobs. They're going to be doing even more intense AoE damage. I don't know. We don't know yet if Fortified affects the disguised Nathrezim throughout the dungeons, the infiltrators. If Fortified does affect those, then that's also going to be spicy for a lot of players. I know that Tyrannical didn't affect Zul'Gurmux, but if Fortified affects Zul'Gurmux, that would also be something that would be rather scary.
It sounds scary, actually, yeah.
So I'm hoping it doesn't. Typically, the seasonal affix is not something that gets interacted with the rest of the affixes, but you never know until you do it and you find out and you see what Blizzard has to say about it later on.
And then you look for blue text to see what is intentional and what is not.
Exactly. So yeah, you sort of you're gonna have to pay attention to that. When it comes to these dungeons, like this week to me screams Grimrail is a nightmare just because of Sanguine. I'm sure a lot of people who ran Grimrail last week experienced the infiltrators putting down fear puddles that directly block your pathway. So you literally have no option but to walk into a fear puddle, sleep puddle, get slept, and then have to get dispelled and walk out of it, because that's the only way you could move forward in the dungeon, which was a little silly. Yeah. And so Sanguine's essentially going to do the same thing. You're going to have giant puddles of Sanguine that players have to move through, which means they will 100% then get a Grievous stack, because the Sanguine puddle will drop them below 90% health. And they'll start getting a Grievous stack on them just to progress forward through the dungeon. You're going to run into also very similar issues inside Lower Karazhan, because not only do you have a lot of trash, which means you're going to have a lot of puddles, but you also have tight corridors that you're working your way through. Upper Karazhan won't be quite as bad, simply because there's less trash, although the bridges that take you between areas are going to be rough. The two places I really see is if they haven't made it so that, and I hope they did, the library mobs, when you have those giant packs of worms in the library that you kill off, if those things drop Sanguine, I am going to be frustrated with Blizzard. Those things should not drop Sanguine.
They kind of explode. They probably will even explode with Fortified. So
yeah,
you know, I mean, you gotta think ahead a little bit. That's always a key on Sanguine Week, and have your tank be ready to move at a moment's notice.
But yes, I'm hoping those things don't drop Sanguine, because otherwise, outside of that, it's just a couple of bridge areas inside Upper Kara that could potentially pose an issue. I mean, I'm not going to talk a ton about Tazavesh, because we've been talking about Tazavesh up till now, and all the same things still apply when it comes to basically Gambit's probably my favorite Mythic Plus dungeon since Legion. It's wonderful. I love that.
It's really good.
I love that dungeon.
I think Streets is good too. I mean, I think they really ended up with both of those in a good spot, and they're not ones that, like, with any kind of affix combo, it's not like, oh, Gambit's going to be horrible because of reason.
Yeah. And then, as you already mentioned, Streets itself doesn't have a lot of affixes here that are going to massively affect you. When it comes to Grimrail, we talked about Iron Docks. This is probably a great Iron Docks week. Yes, the trash can hit hard, There's certainly some difficult trash in the first area when you first zone in, where you're going to feel it with Fortified. But Grievous should be manageable, and Sanguine you should have enough room to drop puddles around. So I think this is just a lower Karazhan in particular. Like specifically, this week's going to be a terrible week to try and do lower Karazhan at all. Outside of that,
even worse than last week.
Yeah, exactly.
Even with the nerfs, like it's. I mean, that was the way it was back in Legion, right? Like lower Kara was it was a gnarly experience on a bad trash week, and this is a bad fort combo. I try to silver line it every week, or say, here's the case where it's not that bad, or here's the way to make it not as bad. Like this is rough, especially early season. The only good thing here is that if you're fighting stuff that isn't like heavily AoEing, that you just need your tank and healer to work together, and you're probably okay. Like if your tank can handle Sanguine and protect themselves a bit, and your healer can just keep some heals rolling on them to keep those Grievous stacks manageable, then at least that's good. And for the most part, DPS can DPS, make stuff die, which means less Grievous overall. It does mean more Sanguine, but if your tank is doing what they need to do, and people aren't brain farting and like hard stunning stuff as something next to it's about to die, then Sanguine is not what it was back in Legion. I mean, it doesn't last anywhere near as long. So, and we've kind of learned some different ways to deal with it better. It's such a part of the vocabulary now versus the way it was back then. But, early season, this is a tough fort combo week, but I think ultimately it's manageable in most places. I'm not going to be eager to do lower Kara if that's on the table for my Keystone group this week. I think there's just better options out there. Even the other hard dungeons don't seem as bad as that.
Yeah. As far as actually, one last thing. Darkmoon Faire is currently live. It's live until next Saturday, so be sure you're taking advantage. It goes until the 13th, and then obviously on the Sunday it stops. So be sure that you are taking advantage of Darkmoon Faire while it's up for the experience buff and the reputation buff and your profession stuff. If you're someone who's trying to skill up professions, it's a really easy way to get some points for that. There's races and transmog and mounts and achievements and all sorts of stuff going on.
If you can do the dance game yet, there's an achievement and a toy from that, right? The reward for the achievement is a toy, and it's pretty simple. Like it's decently fun. You'll probably only ever do it one time, but if you've never done it, you can go do it. Actually, you get a whole bunch of achievements, which if you like seeing stuff pop up on the screen, can be very rewarding. So I would recommend that if you think of it before Saturday night. If you head down, I mean, everybody likes getting achievements and toy rewards for them and stuff. So go check that. It's only been what, like a few times that we've actually seen it. So
I think there's the third. I think it's the third time.
Yeah, so go give it a look.
You reminded me when you mentioned toys. There's one other thing I want to mention for Mythic Plus. Lower Karazhan, Attunement, who puts the debuff on players that basically you have to dispel the correct player. Everyone gets a debuff. One player has a shadow of Attunement that keeps appearing above them. That has to get dispelled on that player, which then clears the debuff for all players. A really easy way to be able to see that visual, because there's so many graphics and other stuff going on, is to use your Corgi goggles to turn all of your raid members into Corgis, all of your group members into Corgis, which then basically removes all the armor and visual effects from their characters, which makes it really easy to see which one's debuffed.
There you go. Just do that all the time anyway.
The Corgi goggles coming in clutch on that boss if you're someone who's having trouble spotting that. Okay, hot fixes for the week. We have a bunch of Survival Hunter changes. Basically, they nerfed the 4-set and then buffed a bunch of individual abilities. They say that Survival Hunter's Mad Bomber 4-piece set bonus is still causing Survival Hunters to overperform in multiple target situations. We're lowering the effectiveness of the 4-piece while also increasing the damage of your single target abilities to offset this loss of damage against single target. In other words, saying, hey, you guys are just doing too much AoE, and we don't want to reduce your single target, so they're just taking from AoE and making sure your single target stays the same. So you got nerfed. If you're a Survival Hunter, just be aware. And then Warlocks is the other note I wanted to bring up. Destruction, Rain of Fire damage was reduced by 20%, and Immolation Aura damage was reduced by 20%. Basically, they're still seeing Destruction excel in multi-target situations, and so they're applying changes to stabilize their throughput when scaling with hit target count or high target counts. Yeah, I mean, when it comes down to it, Warlock still has the two, as in the two top highest DPSing specs. So both Demonology and Destruction are the best DPS specs in the game. So them nerfing Destruction a little bit, I think, is fine. You still have the best DPS spec in the game with Demonology. And maybe at some point they'll start looking at bringing some other classes up to get into balance with where Warlock has been for a while now.
Yeah, this is a soft nerf or a soft buff to Mythic Dungeons, though, man. Sort of. Maybe it's a hard buff. Like, your Warlock's just not going to be doing as much AoE, and it's Fort Week.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's very true. All right, as far as dungeon and raids go, and hotfixes that happen to those as far as tuning goes, in Fated Castle Nathria, they fixed an issue where Raid Finder difficulty was erroneously granting enemies less stats than intended. I mean, so it was too easy? That was the problem? Interesting. Okay.
Yeah, I remember I didn't do LFR like at reset last week. If you can imagine that, wasn't the first thing I ran into. But some guildies were in there and stuff, and they were like, bosses are literally dying in 45 seconds.
Yeah.
So that's not correct, and that's certainly not like the way Raid Finder ever works in practice. So yeah, there was something wrong with it. If you did Fated Nathria LFR right after reset last week, you may have a bit of a skewed conception of like what the target is for Fated LFR. It's still not very hard, but it's not that easy. Bosses are not going to be dead inside of a minute, but yeah.
They fixed an issue causing some boss abilities to inflict too much damage and causing some player abilities to inflict too little damage inside Castle Nathria. So obviously that is a problem. I'm glad that's fixed. They fixed an issue that could cause client and server latency after bosses are defeated, which was a huge problem all through last week. The latency issues with the server were massively noticeable. And then on Sardin Athris, they improved a client and server performance caused by Echo of Sin's Painful Memories. That was one of the issues that was happening. I feel like designing a Fated affix that every time you kill something, two of them spawn is probably not something that you should consider when it comes to server latency and causing issues. When we were doing Zymox, we literally like froze people's computers for multiple seconds. The amount of AoE we were outputting, killing those imps that then split into more imps, that split into more imps, that split into, like, it was nuts. Like everyone's computer just froze for a moment during it, and then the affix ended and everything sort of sped back up again. You were like, wow, okay, apparently we killed a lot of imps and spawned a lot of imps because literally the game couldn't handle what we were doing. I feel like there was a Sylvanas Arrows issue, which is something that they already struggled with when they were doing Sylvanas fight, balancing out the amount of targets, the amount of damage happening to that amount of targets. And then they just put another one into the game as an affix. So maybe they need to learn their lesson a little bit here.
And let's see how bad Sylvanas performs this week.
Exactly. Yeah, that'll be another curious thing. So I feel like the Fated Raid affixes are cool. I do think that when they're designing them, they need to think about how is this going to affect players' computers when we are essentially giving them 80 or 90 or 100 and something targets that they're all hitting at the same time, with visual effects, with boss visual effects happening, with mechanics that they're supposed to be doing. Like, is this possible to do? Or do we basically say, well, part of the affix is you have to hold damage so that your computer doesn't crash while you're trying to do this boss. Like, that's, that'd be
you ever play the old X-Men game for Sega Genesis?
Yes.
Yeah, it's remember like the Mojo World stage, and if you fight Mojo at the end, and in order to win, you have to reset the computer. And what that meant was you had to literally push the reset button on your Genesis, and then it would like take you past the stage. Like, you had to like meta play the game. That's what that reminds me of.
Yeah.
Stop DPS or your computer crashes.
Yeah.
Yeah, we don't like that. And I think that's that's sort of the problem that I think we're running into a little bit with the idea of the faded affixes in general. I feel like they're unnecessary. The buffs are really cool, and some of them are ridiculously powerful, but there's so much going on in these fights already. And just, you get into the issue of server performance, client performance. You get into the issue of people not being able to just parse everything they're seeing on their screen and react to it and understand what to do. Sire Denathrius is already a really mechanically complex fight for what it is, and then you're going to add this other thing on it that potentially rotates depending on what week it is or what difficulty you're playing on or something.
I'm waiting for it to be the interrupt orb, and then someone just misses an interrupt mid-sire and just wipes the whole raid.
Well, that's what we had on Heroic was the interrupt orb. Yeah, and it was like, okay, well, we got to just stick somebody on it because it's on the wrong side of the mirror. I don't know. It's to me the faded stuff mostly felt okay, except for Denathrius. It's this does not need to be here. This is all this is adding a layer of complexity and difficulty to this fight for a relatively minor benefit that it's not improving our results. So yeah, I mean there's a lot of potential pitfalls with adding these layers on, and including server and client performance.
Yeah. As far as faded powers go, the reconfiguration emitter now shows an additional visual effect while immune to damage before the first interrupt to prove its clarity. It's kind of crappy if you are throwing damage into something that's immune because it has a health bar and you think you should be able to. That sucks. But that's going to happen the first time we see it. So at least they're making that a little bit clear. Mythic Plus, they fixed an issue that caused listed Grimrail depots and Iron Docks keystones to not appear in the Group Finder UI when searching by keystone level. I noticed this. I was very confused when I was like, I want to search between 15s and 20s. So I do 15-20. It'll bring up all the keys that are between 15 and 20. That's kind of cool to do. I like that that's a feature.
Yeah, that's nice.
None of them were Grimrail or Iron Docks. And I was like, is no one rolling these keystones? What is going on? And then you search for Grimrail or Iron Docks and a whole bunch of keystones come up. And you're like, I see.
I think what it comes down to is just nobody wants to do your Grimrail depot, which is weird because how did it win the poll? Why do we have to do it? Everybody said they wanted to do it.
Yep.
But it's this. Yeah, that's my conspiracy theory. This wasn't even a hot fix. It's just nobody wanted to do Grimrail Depot.
It would be weird if we, as a community, if we all banded together and just chose to shun it and run other keys and then re-roll our depots into something else at the end of the keys. Yeah.
Right. Even though it's the one we specifically asked for. Not you and I, but as a collective, we said, yes, Grimrail Depot is the keystone dungeon we must have.
Whenever someone complains about Grimrail Depot, I'm like, we could have had Bloodmaw Slagmines. We could have had Bloodmaw Slagmines.
Oh, Slagmines would have been so good.
Yep,
I'm just going to say that forever. Maybe someday, we're going to have rotating old dungeons. Maybe it lives again.
Yeah, maybe. All right. As far as the affixes go, Shrouded, the Zul'Gurmuk's blood barrier has been reduced by 33%. So every time he does that bloodberry, he drains life from players and does damage to them, and obviously doesn't take damage because he has a big blood barrier up. So that being reduced by 33% means you're going to kill it a third faster than you were previously, which means he's going to do less damage to the group, which means that your Grievous stacks aren't going to get as high, which is going to be really nice. And it also
huge
means that
nerf.
you're able to kill him faster. So great. He also now casts it less often, which means that if we were seeing 3 or 4 of these shields, maybe you only see 2 of these shields. Which I think would also be very nice, because in general, it's just an ability that prolongs how long he's alive. There was also something, and I don't know if this was intended or not. It felt like something that wasn't super intended. Prot paladins could use their shield to interrupt his blood barrier cast if it happened within the correct moment of him starting the cast of blood barrier. You could technically silence him, which would just remove the ability to cast Blood Barrier, which was kind of crazy, because you could then just do that every time and kill the boss without having to ever see the mechanic. And only Prot Paladins could do this, which felt kind of strange. So I feel like that wasn't intended.
Like unintended,
it's one of those things that's out there. We'll see if Blizz fixes it. As far as the Zul'Gurmuk's location, inside Upper Karazhan, they moved him around, so we have to figure out where that is now, because it's no longer the big mob after Curator.
Wherever it is, it's better than where it was last week, because this mob spawned inside the thing that pats around the upside down platform you walk into out of Curator's room, where you have
Surrounded by bats
barfing on you. Yeah, it was really terrible.
Yeah.
Especially with unnerfed blood barrier and blood barrier casting more frequently than it will going forward.
Yeah.
Man, yeah, I think we went in there on Wednesday and it was just like, what is happening? Why did they put this here? But it's not there anymore, so that's a plus.
I'm curious as to where I'm hoping it's one of the rats. That's what I'm hoping is now Zul'Gurmux.
That would be
That's
okay.
a great room.
Yeah.
It's a great room.
I kind of want it before Medivh. So then I guess the only other place it could be is that other awful mob before Medivh, because there's only really 2 mobs that you would realistically kill between Curator and Medivh.
If they replaced the mob before Curator that silences you and puts your image somewhere you have to run to, make that mob Zul'Gurmux. I want that mob to be Zul'Gurmux because I don't like fighting that mob.
No, yeah, it's annoying. You get disrupted so much. It's cool looking. It doesn't have any arms, but it's got these weird like energy shields where both of its arms would be. Like it's awesome looking, but yeah, it's annoying to fight. And then that would be 3 more stacks of your Nathrezim buff you get before Curator even. So I'd be here for that.
Yeah, that would be cool. Or you just make it the first Banshee at the base of the stairs when you zone in.
There you go. Just give me all of my versatility stacks right away, and then
immediately. Let's go. Yeah. All right. As far as quaking goes, players will no longer be taking damage during Skolok's Gron Smash in Iron Docks. This is the knockback that you get. This almost killed people in our group when we were doing Iron Docks. You all get knocked backwards, and if the timing is right, then quaking goes off as you're all knocked in a pile and explodes and kills you all. There's
like a moment where you can't even control your character, right? You're like in stasis as you get kind of knocked back. So if it goes off in that window, well, you can't even react to it. So that's got to be one of those things that wasn't maybe necessarily intended or whatever. Like they obviously don't want you to die to a quaking there.
Yeah, it's there was one other place that happened last week where I actually died to a quaking because of all of us traveling at the same time off of a travel thing, and it just went off while we were all in the air and killed me. So they're at least going through and fixing those moments that shouldn't be able to happen. You shouldn't have to wait for quaking to go off before clicking a travel, or time your travel so that one person clicks and you wait 2 seconds, and one person clicks and you wait 2 seconds. That would be dumb.
Right, in a world where that timer is just ticking down and ticking down, and you got to go. Yeah.
This is better. Grimrail Depot, the Gromkar's Captain's Reckless Slash will now be cast less frequently, as well as Farseer's Storm Shield can now be purged, and the Cinder Seer will no longer cast Lava Wreath. So they are definitely helping out with that a lot. I know the Storm Shield was a really big one for interrupts, so I am glad to see they can now just be purged, because it means a bunch of classes can now remove it. It also probably means that mages can now steal it, which is kind of cool. So we'll see what happens with that. I
think so. Yeah, usually purgeable stuff is spell stealable, and we are coming into a fort week, so nice to see these changes coming up, because this trash is pretty nasty.
Yeah. Railmaster Rocket Sparks with Borka the Brute's Mad Dash damage reduced by 30%. This is where he picks a direction and runs across it, and typically what you want to do is aim it towards where Railmaster Rocket Spark has sort of jumped up into the rafters, so it knocks him down from the rafters and you can DPS him. It's great that this does less damage, because this was absolutely insane. When if you either the tank got hit by it, it would pretty much one-shot your tank, and when it did slam into the wall and do the AoE damage, it was a hefty chunk of damage for everyone to take right before you had a whole bunch of AoE damage going out, or actually it was right after you had a whole bunch of AoE damage going out from Rocket Master Railspark doing all these. Railmaster Rocket Spark, although Rocket Master Railspark sounds kind of cool too.
That's
his cousin.
The other one, and I don't know what they do. They are on roller skates or something.
And then of course Skylord Tavra, they fixed an issue that would prevent Skylord from appearing once conditions were met. I don't really know what that issue would be, but that would suck. You can't complete the dungeon.
Like, okay, guys, we're on track to time this. All we got to do is kill the last boss.
Where is it?
Drum roll.
Yeah, exactly.
The boss never shows up. Oh, no.
They improved the visual on Spinning Spear. This does help a lot, because Spinning Spear is something you got to dodge. And then Thunderous Breath, initial damage reduced by 25%. So the issue with Thunderous Breath is you get hit by it. There isn't like a window where they're like, hey, we're telegraphing where this is going to land. because it initially lands on 3 sections of a 9-section grid. And then as you get later into the fight, it starts filling out, 4 sections, 5 sections every time that the dragon goes by. And this means that you are going to get hit by this damage. And this damage was like 30 to 40% of your health every time you got hit by this. So it was one of those really dangerous situations for a lot of players. So reducing that by 25% so you just don't take as hard of a hit was great. Now, there were places people were figuring out where they could stand where they would never get hit by this. On that platform, at each of the corners of that platform, that rectangle, if you picture that's what that train car kind of looks like, there are wooden little platforms that kind of stick out, and you can inch your way out onto them and stay on those wooden platforms and not get hit by the breath at all. However, if you inch too far, you fall off the train and die. And if you fall off the train and die, you are then placed so far back on the train you cannot be rezzed during that fight. You are just out of range. So it's very bad. So if you are going to do that, just be super cautious doing it. You will still have spears thrown at you. You will still have ice traps placed under your feet that you still have to dodge and avoid. But you can technically avoid the initial damage of the breath, and that's what people were doing to time higher end keys for Grimrail Depot, so that players were being one-shot by this breath.
Yeah, it's a very claustrophobic kind of fight as it ramps up, especially like early season Tyrannical. It's going to be a long fight. It's that initial thunderous breath tick being reduced by that much is great because it gives you time to react to it, which is the important thing. If the thing just flies by and kills you, what are you supposed to do? You can't really know where it's going to be. There's not, like you kind of mentioned, it's not like there's a call out on the ground. Like there's a line that then the thunderous breath is going to inhabit. It's just there. And it's like, okay, you have to figure out where to stand. At least now you have a little bit more time to make that happen before you go boom. So that's a big plus. I mean, I think the big thing about doing stuff like this to these bosses, because I didn't think the mad dash damage to me was that bad. Maybe it's avoidable for the tank, but from what I remember, like the dash comes out, right as the cast finishes, so the direction needs to be locked into where Railmaster is. So I always get hit with it. I don't know if I can avoid it somehow, but it didn't seem that bad. But the thing about it is when you cut these like really punishing abilities down this much, it opens up the space for higher keys to get pushed.
Yeah.
It's one thing if it's not a problem at 15, 16, 17, but once you get up to 18, 19, 20 plus, that stuff is there's not enough counterplay there for people to actually deal with. So what are you supposed to do? Mad dash happens constantly. Thunderous breath happens constantly. You can't just immunity your way through it.
Yeah.
So this opens up space at the top end of keys for people to keep pushing. So that's good.
Yeah. As far as Iron Docks go, they fixed an issue where Siegecrafter Ulugar's Gate Crasher could become stuck on players. Well, that's a problem. I don't like having a Gate Crasher stuck on me.
No.
Yeah, so I'm glad that got fixed. They flesh rendered Nokgar. The burning arrows now have a visual effect indicating where they will impact. This is actually a big deal because the burning arrows before, you just take damage from. There wasn't like a way to avoid them. There was nothing telegraphed, so now at least you can see them and move out of their way as they are coming in, which is really nice. Another trick with those arrows, when you pull this boss and you have them near the actual dock where the water is, there's a set of chains that go along posts. If you stand on the chain, you do not get hit by arrows, just as an FYI. So for ranged players and healers, jump up onto those chains and sit on those chains. For at least the first half of the fight, you will not take damage from the arrows, which is really nice. And then in the second half, I think technically the spell changes what it actually is, and you will start taking damage from the arrows. So you need to actually pay attention to them in the second half, but in the first half, that's a neat little trick for those. Dreadfang's shredding swipes should no longer hit players multiple times. That's great, because this boss can be a pain to actually deal with, and I'm glad that they took care of that problem. And then, of course, Oshir, the Feeding Frenzy, which this is the big sort of cat person creature that you fight. I can't remember what they're called right now. But Feeding Frenzy now...
I think they Saberon.
They're Saber... Was it Saberon? Is that what it is?
Yeah. I believe so.
they now require 5% damage to be done to Oshir to interrupt the Feeding Frenzy, as opposed to 8%. 8% was a lot of damage.
Like, it's a big nerf. Small numbers, but that's a big nerf.
Yeah, the 3% nerf is a big nerf in the sense that when I was running this dungeon, they were probably getting 12 seconds or so of being CC'd before this broke. That's a long time for someone to have to be funneling healing into someone taking really extensive damage, and B, for that person to just not be doing damage. Where all your players are just sinking damage into the boss to try and break it. So it's a lot of lost uptime. So,
and it compounds the problem too. Yeah. I mean, 3 percentage points in this case is more than a 50% nerf to the total absorb. So massive improvement on Oshir.
Yeah. Skullluck's melee damage reduced by 15%. This was hilarious. So every time Skullluck knocks everyone back and you run back up to start, you have to run to hide in line of sight to avoid a bunch of bombardment, and then you actually get to go up and pull Skullluck again. He resets his aggro table. He drops his aggro table. We had a fairly overzealous hunter go running up to hit him to sort of stop him from doing his bombardment, but then of course Skullluck had aggro on him because FYI he drops his aggro tables. So Skullluck just turned and meleeed this hunter and one-shot him, and we all giggled, which was great.
Yeah, we kind of had the same thing happen. The hunter I was with was like, "Oh, I'm just gonna turtle and run up and tag
exactly.
it."
Yeah,
and like, I guess that's what we used to do back then, but yeah, don't do that. Just wait for the tank. I mean, even with 15% melee damage reduction, you still might die.
Yeah,
and yeah, his aggro is wonky after that reset.
Yeah, Koromar will no longer cast Shattering Blade. So this is just removing Shattering Blade, the ability from the boss character entirely, which is big. They did this a bunch. They removed a bunch of abilities from characters. So,
I mean, I think what you see with these Warlords dungeons specifically, like these dungeons have never been Keystones before last week, right, in the live game. Never. The concept didn't exist during Warlords of Draenor, and what you see is that the bosses, in some cases, really were not built to scale, which is very important for Mythic Plus to function, obviously, right? Like, if you can't do that next rank, then the system eventually breaks down. And, you know, some of these things make it so that you are going to get hard stuck, like, earlier than maybe you would in dungeons that scale up better and more favorably for players. So I think that's really where we're seeing these changes come in. Which we'll probably see more. I don't know. Again, doing 15, 16, 17s, I didn't think these dungeons felt bad. They didn't feel anywhere near as bad as I was fearing, but there were some obvious issues, and I think they've made some smart changes here to keep them feeling, you know, approachable as we start working our way up the ladder.
I would also mention that when it comes to these Warlords dungeons and balancing them, we had multi-strike and bonus armor and all these other like crazy secondary stats during Warlords, which I think a lot of people forget. Like when you're talking about like a 5, you know, going from 8% to 5% on something, it's like, well, that 8% might have been fine back in Warlords because maybe with multi-strike, people were just generating more damage because, hey, FYI, you had a chance to just do 2 times the damage. You know,
right?
So,
which makes maybe bursting a shield down a bit easier or something, like on Oshir. Yeah, it's, you know, it's a different time. I mean, Warlords was a really long time ago now. Somehow, I don't know how that happened, but I'm pretty sure Warlords is almost 8 years old.
It is. It's
and
2014.
Dungeon, like dungeon gameplay has changed a lot in the last 6 years, and I think they continue to refine the Keystone Dungeon system. I think Shadowlands really was the best that we've seen it, and keeps getting better as we go through, but. You know, it seems like part of the ethos here is that we're going to have older dungeons that were never Keystones, you know, join into the rotation. And so we're going to have these rocky initial experiences with them where stuff doesn't really work right or doesn't work in the context of a Keystone. And they're going to have to go in and tidy it up. Of course, you know, we are also going to see situations where dungeons that used to be Keystones and are now Keystones again need to be like essentially redesigned in a lot of ways because they don't work. Even though they were designed to work with Keystones once upon a time, they don't anymore.
Yeah, it's going to be I'm going to be curious to see what the next wave of fixes look like. But we're not through all the dungeon ones yet. They actually had Upper Mechagon, which is Workshop, where King Mechagon's Magneto Arm now scales with Tyrannical Affix instead of Fortified Affix. FYI, this is their way of giving you another week to time a good Mechagon key. Last week it scaled with Fortified, which means the Magneto Arm wasn't doing increased damage based off of it being a Tyrannical week. This week it now scales with Tyrannical, which means during our Fortified week, we now have this Meccano Arm not doing additional damage like it would have had it left the other way. So if you want to do King Mechagon, this is a great week to do it because that Magneto Arm will not be something you feel doing increased damage. It didn't do nearly as much damage as I was expecting. Typically, that's like you have to blow cooldowns to make everyone alive, and you're moving while you do it. Whereas this was a different situation. And back then, I could cast Tranquility while I moved, and now I can't. And so I'm going to continue bringing that up because I want it inside Dragonflight. Give me it back, please. So we'll have to see how that goes in 2 weeks when Tyrannical rolls back around again, how much this Meccano Arm's actually hitting for. Lower Karazhan?
Yeah, I did it, yesterday I did it, and it didn't feel bad at all. So it was actually Tyrannical Mechagon was like surprisingly easy from what I was gearing myself up for. So yeah, maybe it'll be a lot worse in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
Or I guess next week. Yesterday being a week ago.
That's true. Return to Karazhan lower. They fixed an issue where players could exchange keystones with Tass Up, even if they failed the dungeon within the time limit. That's a weird thing specifically to lower Karazhan. But, I mean, I think that's just a bonus for having done a lower Karazhan. Like, let's just be clear.
Yeah, I feel like that should be intended behavior in lower specifically. Like, all right, yeah, we didn't think you'd time it. Do you want to do a different dungeon? Here you go.
Exactly, yeah. Improve the visual effect on Ghostly Philanthropist Pennies from Heaven. Lord Crispin's Ference's Willbreaker is now more visible, so just making the visibility on spells much better. FYI, the visibility on the big bosses, the big infiltrator bosses, which is Zul'Gumux, inside of Gambit with the water puddles, they need to work on that. The big purple swirly and stuff is invisible with the water puddles at the beginning of Gambit. They need to work on stuff that sits underneath stuff, especially when thinking about Karazhan with rugs, because that was the big thing with Volcanic way back in the day, if you remember. It would
under the rugs.
It would hide under the rugs, and you wouldn't even know it's under your feet until it blew you up in the air and did a whole bunch of damage to you back then, which is what it used to do. So I think they need to work on these visuals across the board, which I'm excited for since I see they're doing it already. Gang of Ruffians Poisonous Shank, damage reduced by 30%, and Attunement, the invisibility of the intangible presence has been increased, as well as the spectral charge no longer damages pets. Oh my goodness, that would be irritating. You have to like call your pet to your side constantly to try and weave through the horses going back and forth across the room, which literally you have to weave through. You can't just stand in one place. Like you have to weave through them. I would be super frustrated if my pet kept dying to that over and over again. So I'm glad that got
dismiss it or let it die or something.
Exactly.
At least you don't have to worry about it now. But yeah, that must have been fun this week.
Yeah. The Opera Hall Westfall story fixed an issue that would cause the encounter to prematurely end if either Tony or Murgria were defeated before the other. Yeah, I noticed this last week. One of the people in our group's like, just kill Tony as fast as possible and you'll just end the fight. And I was like, really? That's not supposed to happen. So, yep. And then they fixed an issue where Shoreline Tide speakers could continue casting after being defeated. Yeah, that's really bad. This event last week was one where literally when it started, you just laid into the ads as hard as possible, because the ads for Tony put poisons on everybody, which were really, really obnoxious. And on the other side, the Shoreline Tide speakers would, some of these orbs that would just one-shot you if they hit you that you had to dodge. So yeah, I'm glad that they're getting rid of that because that was super frustrating. So good on them.
I feel like stuff shouldn't be casting at you after it's defeated.
Yeah.
And that's not fair. I mean, I understand the game cheats and it's Karazhan and Medivh cheats, and I get that, but yeah, after we defeat you, stop attacking us, please. That's why we defeated you. That was the main thing that we wanted you to do, was to stop attacking us. That's why you had to be defeated.
Yep. All right, the Opera Hall with Wicket. The winged assistant's health has been reduced by 30%, and Maiden of Virtue's Holy Bulwark Absorb Shield was reduced by 20%. That I'm not surprised about at all. The Absorb Shield, you really did have to have every single person DPSing that shield, and in some cases you saved heroism for it to make sure you actually got through that shield, which meant it was probably tuned a little bit too high. I mean, even with the damage increases we're going to be getting from gear going up. It just limits, as you were talking about earlier, how high of a keystone this dungeon could go. Because if Maiden of Virtue is just, you cannot break the shield after doing a 20, then what's the point, right? Like, if that's the cap. So,
right. Yeah, it's just not the intent of the system. Yeah, it's just got to move. Yeah.
Yeah. Moreau's got probably one of the largest changes we've seen to a mechanic in a long time. Moreau's duration of his Garrote now actually has a duration. It was a permanent debuff. Basically, throughout the fight, Moreau's would backstab players, which would leave Garrote players, I guess is the best way to say it, which would leave a bleed on them, which could stack, depending on whether or not he's garroting the same players over and over. That the only way to remove was to be like a dwarf, or a Dark Iron Dwarf, or have a Kyrian potion, or be a paladin who can cast Bop on people, was like the only ways to really remove that bleed, which meant that it was basically permanent on most groups. And it's a hard enrage. It's a soft enrage, should I say. So throughout the fight, you'll typically 3-4 people with it, and then you'll start getting double stacks, and you'll start having other issues happen, and people just start dying left, right, and center to the Garrote. Well, it now has a duration. It's now 1 minute, which means you're going to get it, and you have to deal with it for a minute, and I guess technically it could get refreshed if he chose you again and apply an additional stack, which is still scary, but you are going to run into that situation where it doesn't feel as impending doom as it used to be. Like, it used to be like, oh, we got 3 bleeds out. Okay, we need to kill him in the next 15 seconds or we are in trouble. So at least that is something that they're dealing with. And what I like about this, so I agree with those who are the purists who are like, hey, I really liked that this was a soft enrage. That was like a critical mechanic to what Moreau's was. But what I like about this is it opens up group viability. You aren't going to have that situation where it's like, oh, I don't want to do Lower Karazhan unless you are X class, X covenant, or X race. And then that is the only thing that comes in and does it. Because that's just irritating. Like, if the only way if the only way a druid can get into these dungeons is if they were Kyrian, that's the only way a druid could go, that'd be kind of dumb. Right. Like, come on.
Yeah, it's just a layer that I don't think that really appeals to players. Not in a dungeon situation. I mean, this obviously calls back to Burning Crusade, Karazhan, Raid, Moreau's, right? And this is exactly the way that ability worked in the Moreau's fight in that raid. And it was essentially a soft enrage there. So it's a callback to that concept. And it's cool in that way. But yeah, I don't think it functions very well in the modern context. I think making it something that will fall out. I mean, if you're doing a high tyrannical or whatever, you're going to be in combat with this fight for, I don't know, 4 minutes?
Oh, at least.
Maybe more than that. So, you can't have those bleeds stacking up for 4 minutes because you'll just all die. And then what? That's no fun. That's the wall we always talk about tyrannical weeks, a kind of caveat of like, okay, well, the combo's not bad, but Moreau's is going to bleed you to death permanently. No, we don't like that. So I think it's a good change. Like, it's a change that needs to happen for where the game is at right now. If they ever bring this fight back again in some different context, then can we have the permanent bleed on Moreau's? Maybe, but I think for what we're doing right here, this is a great change. This is what needs to happen to keep Lower Kara in line with the rest of the pool.
Yeah. And then another one was Moreau's Dinner Party effect now increases the damage and attack speed of nearby dinner guests by 50%, down from 100%. So obviously another change that will make this a little bit easier. Yeah.
Massive nerf there.
Yeah. Return to Karazhan Upper. Curator, they fixed an issue that causing volatile energy to fixate on pets. I don't really have an issue with that. I'm fine with the pet getting fixated by volatile energy.
Didn't have to fix that one.
Yeah.
That was fine.
Yeah, those things can tank those things all day long. I'm fine with it. Shade of Medivh. So this is the one that I wanted to see huge changes to, and we got one change really. They fixed an issue causing Flame Wreath's visual effect to linger after the encounter ends. I mean, obviously people are terrified to move during Flame Wreath as is. You don't need it to linger afterwards to troll players, feeling like if they moved, they might kill everybody, even though the fight's over. But more importantly, Flame Wreath damage was reduced by 30%. And this is interesting to me, right? Because this is a change. I like this change. But this is a change where at a certain point, it doesn't actually affect anything. At a certain keystone level, Flame Wreath still just one-shots everybody if you move. But at lower keystones, so if you're doing like a 7 or an 8, most likely if someone happens to mess up as they're learning to do the key, learning to do, Karazhan Upper on lower keys, you could actually have someone move during Flame Wreath, the Flame Wreath goes off, everyone drops really low, but you can recover from it, right? And that's the I can't remember the term now, but that's the affordance. That's the affordance that we want to see on a fight like this, right? We want to see them designing it so that if you're learning it on lower keystones, you can actually have someone move during Flame Wreath and go, oops, I didn't mean to do that. And you can go, don't move during that ability. And you're like, okay, good. And you can have that. It didn't totally wipe our dungeon. We have to start the boss all over again kind of idea. So I like that. But what's interesting is, yeah, like once I would assume if you're doing a 15 or above, Flame Wreath probably still just one shots people because it does so much damage. So yeah, I don't know. It's an interesting change. I'm glad to see it. I want to see more changes to this boss when it comes to the amount of damage, even his cast times. I wouldn't mind seeing his cast times reduced, like all of his cast times reduced by like 25%. So it just takes a little bit, increased by like 25%. So it just takes him a little bit longer to cast all of his spells. So it just passively removes the amount of damage you're taking throughout the fight and passively allows for longer interrupts inside that situation, right? So you don't need to have 2 or 3 interrupts to do this fight really easily.
Yeah, I mean, I think Flame Wreath was definitely the big problem, the big obvious problem. And like you said, the damage was preventing people from learning how to actually deal with the mechanic, right? It's one thing if you die because somebody doesn't understand that Flame Wreath is still going on, or that like when you said Flame Wreath don't move, that they didn't take that literally. Like that's a thing that you learn from experience and can counterplay against. The damage just ramping out of control and overwhelming healers, and then people die because of the combination of Flame Wreath damage and maybe existing dots, and then that sets off the chain reaction where everybody dies. Nobody learned anything from that except, well, I can't heal through Flame Wreath. That's not a fun lesson. So I think I don't know. As much as I want to say, like after the week that I had, like just nerf Shade into the ground and let's move on with our lives, I'm okay with them starting with the obvious problem, and let's see how it feels from that point where we don't have this Flame Wreath death sentence over our heads and we're just hoping we get the other 2 supers and kill them first. I'm fine starting out with that, and especially like if you do upper, Shade of Medivh is going to be a lot easier this week because it's fortified. So we got a week to get gear before Tyrannical comes back around. Like, I think this boss is an outlier in terms of difficulty from what I've seen, and I think it did need changes, but I'm comfortable with them starting with this and going from there. And if it feels like we need more changes as we play it more and they get more data, then I hope they do them, and I hope they do them timely. They've been good about that lately, so that's really all I want to see. I want the game to feel approachable and challenging and fun. And I think most of these dungeons feel that way, but Shade of Medivh certainly did not last week.
Yeah. The Flame Wreath, the other half to this, right, is when you have Flame Wreath on you, you're taking a ticking dot from having Flame Wreath on you, and it used to tick for 25k when I was doing like 15, 16 Upper Kara. So 30% off of that damage is also really nice, because what it meant was if someone got Flame Wreath, you had to interrupt any spell that was being cast at them, because otherwise they would just die and Flame Wreath would go off and kill everybody, which was the other problem with Flame Wreath damage. So I feel like in general it's a good change. I would like to see something like increasing Medivh's cast time so that it actually takes him longer to complete casts. So you don't need as many interrupts to really feel like the fight is being effective. Like, I would like to see it to the point where 2 interrupts is what you really needed for the fight, in the sense that as long as the tank was always interrupting missiles and occasionally the fire cast, there was someone else always interrupting the frost cast, and you were just good. Like, that would be really nice. As is, you want 3 fast interrupts to make this fight feel good. And then during the intermission, you basically have the tank go to one of your arcane intermission. You have the tank go to one of the phoenixes. You have all the DPS go to another one of the phoenixes, and just throw occasional interrupts on the third one, like a range DPS class throwing interrupt on the third one to sort of live through that intermission phase. And that feels like we're leaning towards needing to have a particular group comp to accomplish that. And I dislike when we run into that situation where it's like, oh, well, we don't have 3 fast interrupts, so let's not do Upper Kara. And you're like, ugh. Like, that's irritating.
That tanked an attempted run that we had earlier this week. Like, I had one Upper Kara I just had to walk out of because we couldn't keep the cast under control because we didn't have... I had too much ranged DPS, and one of them didn't have a reliable interrupt. It was a warlock, so it was a mess, and it didn't feel doable at all because of that, and because of the flame wreath damage. My healer couldn't keep up with it, and after a couple attempts, it's like, we're not even getting close, so let's not waste any more time with this.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, Mana Devourer. Mana Devourer will once again cast Decimating Essence upon reaching full mana. There was a bug that apparently if you just didn't soak any orbs at all and just let them all hit Mana Devourer would never actually reach 100% mana.
Oh,
it
really?
just hit 90% and then stopped gaining mana, which meant that you could just literally ignore the mechanic and just DPS the boss. So they fixed that, which I think is good, because obviously that's not how the boss is supposed to work. The energy void damage was reduced by 65%. So this is huge. This is the amount of damage you take when you are removing your stacks. And there are definitely people who are like, if you get more than 2 and you step into the energy void, you will die. So at least they tuned that down a bit, which is great. And then they resolved an issue that caused Coalesce Power to drain more mana than intended. It's no fun when you just run out of mana and can't cast anything. So I'm glad that they resolved that issue as well. Overall, good changes to the dungeons that we've seen, and I'm looking forward to the next round, which I assume will basically see the first 3 days of this week, and then they'll go, okay, so this is what we need to change this week inside all of these dungeons. So we'll see how all that goes.
Yeah, we'll probably see like a ton of trash tuning after this week, right? Once they get a lot of fort data. But yeah, I mean, I think this is a really good sign for Season 4 Keystones, because this is a lot of changes that we saw come in late yesterday, which is kind of their pre-maintenance window for releasing these intended changes. The dungeon pool, I mean, from where I'm sitting and from what I played and kind of my targets for the season, the dungeon pool felt much better last week than I thought that it might, than I feared that it might.
Yeah.
I really was not excited to dive into these. And, is it like perfectly the way I would love for it to be? Not really, but also I have, 20 plus item levels staring me in the face I can go get, and that's going to help a lot. And some of it is familiarity and practice, just like any season. And some of it is tuning. So that, there's some different components here, but this definitely didn't like go splat for me. It's like, okay, this is fun. This is close. They just need to maybe dial a couple things in. And I think it's a great place for Keystones to be for this season.
Yeah. Yeah. I think they're getting there. And I think Lower Karazhan just needs a big old smack pass when it comes to trash.
I think what they're doing at Reset this week is not enough in there probably, but it's a start, and I think they are probably just going to chip away at it instead of turning a dial that's like everything in the dungeon has 15% less health with 15% less damage. Like we're probably not going to do that. So let's start with the stuff that's obvious and see how it starts feeling.
I would love, and this is something for us to note down for later if we ever have a debrief with a dev about how they felt Season 4 went, to hear about the balancing and decisions about where infiltrators were placed throughout the dungeon and how many were, because you can do a gambit right now and end up with like 14 or 15 stacks tops during that gambit of infiltrator buff. You do a Lower Karazhan, you have like 27. And it's like, oh, right. Okay, this feels very different.
Yeah, that's a big difference in character power, whereas, Season 2, there was no variation from dungeon to dungeon. Yep. Like you could skip the mini bosses if you chose to in certain spots, but for the most part, you knew exactly what you were getting. In Season 3, if you skipped a relic pack, well, you just didn't have that short-term buff, so it didn't feel like you were making a choice to choose a different route, which was sort of, you were sacrificing that power for the convenience or efficiency of your route. This season, it's like, well, the infiltrators sort of direct your route or direct your play, or part of routing is you want to figure out how many infiltrators you can get on your way through. But yeah, there's a wide gulf between 7 or 8 or 9 stacks of the infiltrator buff and 15 or 18 or 20. That's your character just plays radically differently at those two different levels.
Yeah, so that would be a curious thing to pick their brains about. All right, as far as blue posts go, abilities not doing expected damage or healing inside Fated Raids. This comes in from Kyvax, who says, as we've examined this and related issues, players noticed our fix seemed to come at the exact time boss's health appeared to go up. So yeah, basically last week, at one point we saw all boss health increase by 15% or something higher than that. It was ridiculous. And everyone was like, oh, wow, that seems terrible. Why are they buffing this already challenging content on a mythic level?
I want to just chime in on that really quick, because what we saw, what you mean when we saw that is not that like Blizzard said that, but people logged into the raid on, was it Wednesday?
Wednesday, yeah.
And bosses
just
like
had
you
more
click
health
on the boss and you look at their health pool and it's a way bigger number than it was the day before.
Exactly.
And there was no communication out of the gate and it was very confusing.
Yeah. They've looked thoroughly into this, and with spell scaling was also causing enemy health to display incorrectly. So basically, when they fix the spell issues, and by spell issues I mean like Disc Priest couldn't use the Atonement ability. It just didn't work. So you couldn't play Discipline Priest. It just wasn't something that worked. The same thing happened with like multiple other classes at launch. You basically could not, like Fire Mage just didn't work. There were other classes that just didn't work. So basically, when they went through and fixed all of those spells, they also somehow made the health of enemy raid bosses appear higher, even though it wasn't higher. So it was a display issue, is what they get at. And that display issue, even though it was showing as having more health, the bosses didn't, and you would still kill them correctly. But if you went back and looked at logs for how much damage was done to the boss inside that window of time, it was the correct amount of health. It was very strange. So
yeah, I couldn't really wrap my brain around the explanation. The best I could come up with is that I guess it was sort of like, okay, you know, when you're like time walking or when you're in a group and not everybody's the same level. And so everything scales and it displays like a certain number to you that is not an absolute number, because you as a level 60 player see it differently than a level 55 player or something. It must be like that kind of
tech
aura is applied to these faded raids, and there were issues with the actual impact and display on both sides. That's the most sense I can make out of what they said about it. Just very strange situation. And I mean, what sucked about this, and it's they've never done anything like Season 4 Faded, right? So it's experimental, and they're working without a net. They're experimenting with it, you know, largely on live servers, right? They didn't know that this happened. Like, they thought, okay, we figured out the issue with these abilities not doing the correct amount of damage. We're done. And then players found it, and so it was a bit of a, you know, a firestorm there for a little bit on Wednesday, where it was like, well, wait, is this like a stealth buff or what's happening here? And there weren't any answers immediately forthcoming because Blizzard wasn't really aware of the issue.
Yeah, they weren't even aware. Like, literally, like people reached out to Blizzard going, hey, did you buff all the boss health? All the boss health is different. And they went, what do you mean the boss health is different? What are you talking about? Like, that was literally their response. And you're like, it's different. Look at the boss health between the 2 days.
They're like, than it was yesterday. It's not supposed to be. Like, So, I mean, you know, this stuff happens. This happens with a live service game. They got the communication out the same day, which is pretty good. I mean, it was a couple hours there of real weirdness, because it's like, what is the intention here? What are they getting at? And does this kind of like, these mythic bosses seem like they're already hard enough. Are they going in like a really bad direction for this season? And that was kind of my fear when I saw what people were reporting, right? Because all we could do at that point was speculate. Like, the devs didn't even know what was happening, so they couldn't communicate about it. Really just a weird kind of confluence of stuff here that caused this problem and that resulted in players having the experience they had and then gleaning like the information that they got from the game client. One of the stranger issues I can remember recently with, you know, stuff like combat and just the raw numbers at play inside the game. Very, very weird stuff.
Yeah, it's that was definitely one of the stranger bugs we've seen. Okay, the next blue post dives a little bit into Dragonflight. We've got 2 more previews. One is the city preview for Valdrakken, which is the new Oribos or Dalaran, if you will. It's the new major hub city that everyone's going to be traveling to. So they've got some images out here for people to have a look at if you haven't been sort of peeking through people's alpha streams. And it's gorgeous. It's phenomenally gorgeous. It's like the mix of it's hard to even describe. It's like a mix of Dalaran with like the Night Fae the heart area of Night Fae with a lot of sort of the Medivh's library. Like there's just so many things tied into this that are just gorgeous. And they sort of go over the key features and highlights in there. But Jason, I mean, as far as appearance goes, this is definitely a phenomenal space that we get to hang out in.
It's kind of not really what I was expecting. I didn't see anything about it or see anybody play through it until I went there myself in the alpha build. And like, it is like a big outdoor space that's sort of in the side of a mountain. And it kind of has these different like plateaus or like levels as you go up. And it almost has like a Stormwind vibe to me in some ways, because you have it's sort of like districted in a way. Like you have like different parts of the city that are definitely like for different purposes. You are in open air and there are different buildings scattered everywhere in different clusters and for different purposes. You know, sort of like that to me, that's like kind of Stormwind-esque. It's not a giant enclosed space like Oribos. It is more like and Dalaran, I think, is similar, right? In Dalaran, you have sort of these buildings that are clustered together for specific purposes. I mean, I think the thing that strikes me every time I log into Alpha is just how nice all the props and stuff look. The stuff that is put in the world to, kind of just visually tell a story and fill out the space. And like the crafting stations and stuff are just, they're ridiculous looking. Like nothing else in the game looks like the stuff that's coming in Dragonflight. And when you go into the Seat of the Aspects, which is sort of like the main hall where your portals are and stuff, like there's this giant like stained glass wall that you see as you go up the stairs, and like the textures are just beautiful. Like it's kind of like stunning what it all really looks like when you play through it, and the sense of scale, right? It's like where dragons live, it's not where humans live, so everything is like massive. It's really something else. And I really like having those expansion hub cities that are faction neutral, and it's not the Alliance City and the Horde City, and this one is like that again. But Oribos always felt empty to me. It just never really brought it home. When I started playing it in like alpha or beta, whenever they put it in, I'm like, okay, this is kind of Ironforge-esque. It's a big loop. Okay, it looks kind of cool, pretty epic.
One sec. Can you go back to this is sort of Ironforge-esque? Looks kind of cool.
It's sort of Ironforge-esque, right? It's like a big loop. It's arranged like that. And I was thinking, like, once they fill it out more, it'll probably be really cool. But it never really felt much different in practice than it did in the early days of testing. Oribos just kind of feels like a big empty space, and it's kind of weirdly hard to navigate, even though it's a circle. I think Valdrakken might end up being hard to navigate because it's so dense. So until you really figure out like where you need to go for stuff, it might kind of have that problem. But at least it's interesting. It feels populated even without many other players there, because there's just NPCs everywhere. They're animated to be like doing stuff, and they're congregating in different places. So, very, very strong first impression. It's pretty epic when you first get up there and you take the little tour of the city and you get introduced to the NPCs that you're hanging out with there. Really, really cool addition to the game. And it seems like, it's going to be functionally one of the better hub cities we've had as well, because there's a lot of stuff you can actually use in Valdrakken.
Yeah, that's what I'm pumped about, is these key features. So like there's not just a bank and PvP vendors and whatnot. There's also a black market auction house there, similar to I guess what you'd see in Dalaran, where we had to go down to the sewer. There was a black market auction house down there, but we didn't really have one inside Oribos. You had to go all the way out to the Venthyr area in Revendreth to go to the black market auction house, which I thought was a little interesting choice to have it so sort of separated. Whereas in this case, it's going to be right there in the hub city. An auction house, which we have not seen inside of a hub city really ever. Outside of like specific engineering ones, like ones engineers could actually use, there was an auction house there. So that's big. I mean, I guess the auction house hubs inside of Oribos were people walking around on their Brutosaur mounts. That was really the only way that it existed there. Yeah. And then we're going to have crafting stations. Remember, all these professions are going to actually have stations you go to craft particular things. So you'll see a lot of that. All the Prussian trainers are there. Void storage, something everyone always forgets about, which actually has been in every hub city, including Oribos. There is void storage there, as well as transmogrifiers are there. Barbershops are there. And then more importantly, portals to Orgrimmar and Stormwind. So they're maintaining the sort of portal hubs in those two cities. So if you're someone who wants to go to whatever expansion, whatever content, you go to either Oribos or Stormwind. You go to either Orgrimmar or Stormwind, depending on which faction you play with, and you're able to sort of get to all of these convenient locations. And they're maintaining that going forward when it came to Dragonflight. So my hope is that we just keep expanding out those portal halls as we get farther and farther into content, and we're always able to have a quick way to sort of hop around from expansion to expansion, which is pretty enjoyable.
Yeah. I checked this out on Alpha this week, and it was kind of funny because there's a portal from Valdrakken to Stormwind that leaves you in the Mage Tower Hall of Portals. And if you run down the hallway, there is a little alcove like set up for the Valdrakken portal, and it's got really nice looking, beautiful Dragonflight themed props all around it. But there's like an under construction barricade in front of it, and there's no portal there. So once you port to Stormwind, you got to go talk to Quester Tarn to get back to Dragonflight. So I wanted to try it and see, like, okay, does the portal actually work both ways yet? And the answer was no. But yeah, I mean, this will just be the portal back will be added on to the portal hall in your respective faction capital. And yeah, it's pretty. If you remember, like not that long ago, we'd have this kind of roulette at the end of every expansion where like portals would disappear and get reconfigured, and it was a headache, and players really hated it. It was maybe the worst part about it. It's like, okay, there are probably gameplay reasons to shut off these convenience portals to places we're not going routinely anymore, but it's jarring, and players just hate when that happens, and maybe you need to just wait a little longer or something. I think this thing of like, okay, Stormwind and Orgrimmar are your main kind of hubs that you get around the world from, and you have easy access back to each continent basically between those two cities and wherever you want to go in a way that's like relatively easily expandable for the team, right? They don't have to make like a new physical space inside the game every time an expansion comes out. They just kind of add on to one that's already there.
Yeah.
So it's pretty cool. And I mean, again, it maybe this is a minor thing, but just dude, the props all around the portals and stuff are so cool. Like when you look at this and you go to the Mage Tower and the portal hall or the one in Orgrimmar, you will have no doubt that you are going to the Dragon Isles when you see what this portal looks like.
Yeah, it's very cool. I will also say the other thing that was always on my mind when I was moving around Valdrakken was the size of doorways, because they have to fit dragons through them. So there's that thing of like, yes, there's the outdoor dragons that are the really big ones, but even like the sort of Drakthir type characters that are moving around, like the big kind of dragon people, like they still have to fit through doors. So often you'll like go into, for example, they talk about the inn that's there, the Roasted Ram, and the doorway is like 2.5 characters high, right? You're like, oh, well, this is weird. But it's like, well, yeah, because there's dragons hanging out in there and they had to be able to get in the door. So when they designed the city, of course, they made bigger doorways. I love touches like that when you think about them. And it's cool to
see. It really just comes a lot. Like, I mean, I don't know. I was in there last night in Valdrakken, and like, there are not a lot of players in this alpha test. I was playing at the very end of it when people had probably done whatever they needed to do. There were very few other players there, but Valdrakken really felt alive. It felt like a place. It felt tangible in a way that I don't think Oribos ever has, even in the live game. So, yeah, very impressed so far.
Yeah. Okay, the next zone preview we get is for Thaldraszus, and Thaldraszus is it's one of those zones that reminds me of like 3 different zones because it's another one of those zones that has like your sand area and sort of your like stony arcane area and your lava area and your sort of greenery area. Like they have different areas, and they're all wicked looking. Like they're all very cool in their own sort of way. And I'm really looking forward to traveling around a lot of this place. I didn't actually explore Thaldraszus that much, but man, there's some really cool looking stuff in here. I think the dragon theme to these zones, of one being almost time based with the sand and one being very sort of arcane based, is pretty cool, man. It's pretty wicked to check out.
Yeah, like this is sort of, I guess this is in the story. It's kind of like where the dragons really sort of sprang forth from. And I mean, this is where the city, like this is a zone where the city is located, right? And So there's sort of influence of each of the dragon flights in some ways in different parts around the zone and around the city and everything. And I think each of the four main flights that have been established so much in the game, not the Black Dragon flight, since that's been, obviously that's in sort of a rebuilding mode here where we come into the story. They have such defined sort of culture kits, personalities, just an aesthetic. And so that's incorporated throughout the zone and throughout the city. And the zone has sort of like this, it's like these, it's almost like a jungle sort of. It's like big mountains with like these waterfalls and just overgrowth. Like stuff is like overgrown up the mountains and the different props for buildings and stuff. It looks really cool. There's like these plant textures all over stuff. And then there's this like desert space where obviously the bronze dragons hang out. So you get a little bit of a different vibe as you move through the space, which, sometimes I like it better when they sort of just dial in on one theme for a zone, but these zones are so big. And so far, I mean, I've seen 3 of the 4 main zones in Dragonflight at this point. We haven't seen the Onaran Plains yet in Alpha, which is the other level up zone, but they all have like a distinct personality and vibe. Like they feel like different physical spaces as you move through them, but there's stuff that ties them all together. There's a connection between all these places. They all kind of logically fit together in my mind in some way, even though I'm playing them out of order, right? Like, because we started like in the middle and then we go to the beginning and then we go towards the end. That's, we're not playing through it in the testing phases linearly, but you can see how all of this stuff all fits together. And there's something kind of interesting that I noticed and started thinking about last night, which is that I was trying to get an idea of like, where is Thaldraszus in relation to the other zones? And so Thaldraszus is kind of like the northeastern part of the main Dragon Isles continent, and the Azure Span is south of it. And the part of Azure Span that is covered in like a glacier and all frozen over is the southern part of Azure Span. And when you zoom out onto the world map in Alpha right now, the map is always like one of the last things they lock in for some reason. It's just, it comes in very late in the process. The Dragon Isles continent is not on the world map in the current Alpha build.
Yeah.
So it stands to reason that the Dragon Isles must be like the farthest thing south that we've ever seen in World of Warcraft, because everywhere else, the southern parts of the continents are hot, equatorial, the deserts. Think of all the stuff down there, like Stranglethorn Vale and Ungaro Crater, all the stuff at the southern ends of those continents, and that stuff is mostly farther south than the other places we've seen. And then up north, you have obviously Northrend, right? And you have kind of the colder climes of the other continents as well, winter, spring, and stuff like that. So Dragon Isles must be on the other half of the equator from basically every other continent that we've been on ever on Azeroth, because the Azure Span must be closer to the South Pole than the North Pole.
Well,
I guess.
Or
unless
they're going to surprise us and flip the whole map 180 at some point.
Cataclysm 2, everything turns upside down.
Exactly. Yeah.
Or Azeroth isn't a sphere and it's like a cube or something and has multiple different poles and Arctic zones.
Well, I mean, there's been the argument forever of what part of we clearly don't make up a full sphere globally.
Right.
So where are all the other continents and where does everything else line up on this planet? Because often when you see pictures of Azeroth, you can see all of the continents that we know of on one side of the planet.
Right,
which is a little weird.
There's always been something missing. I think this is filling in a big piece that we haven't seen before, which is really cool.
Yeah, based on the size of this, it has to. Like if they're doing anything with scale, this has to be a very large chunk of land that exists. So it'd be cool to see. Last thing I want to talk about this zone is they have giant mantises in them, which are just like one of the craziest designed creatures we've seen in a long time. They're wicked intimidating to see.
Yeah, we need mount versions of them or something. I mean, I assume that they're bugs and not humanoids. Although we have humanoid mounts too. There's some like Gronlings and stuff you can ride around on. But they are cool. They kind of remind me of some of the mantid stuff that they did in Pandaria. But, they look more like just, more insectoid and less humanoid.
Yeah.
I assume that they're probably beasts, but yeah, really, I mean, all the new creatures that are coming that I've seen so far really look cool, and they all sort of have this edge to them that makes them look like they're from the Dragon Isles. That there's something about them that like either makes them look like they have sort of a dragon aesthetic in their appearance, or it sells the theme of the zone that they inhabit really well. So I don't know, man. The more of it that I see and get to play, the more impressed I am by what's gone into just the overall aesthetic design of this place and how it all kind of fits together and just fits in as another puzzle piece in Azeroth. Like I can't wait to see the last zone that we haven't seen yet for level up questing. And man, I just want to hang out here and I want to play this stuff.
Yeah. Well, before we wrap up, two other things. First and foremost, today is that weird Burning Crusade server merger, server closing rapture that's taking place, where characters are all being vanished and worlds are disappearing. So yeah, if you're someone who did not move your character around in Burning Crusade Classic before this took place, you may not have access to your character for a couple weeks. If you did, then I hope all your move stuff went well. And wish everyone and the team at WoW best of luck with all of the server closures / mergers that are taking place. That is super not easy to do. So
unprecedented stuff for WoW, right? We've never seen stuff just get like shuttered like this. So yeah, we kind of a weird day in that regard, but hopefully people have taken advantage of the free character moves and won't be too affected in terms of being locked out of stuff.
Yeah. And then in WoW Classic, there is PTR testing notes going on at the moment. On August 4th, they tentatively opened a PTR that they'll use for testing pre-patch content over the coming weeks. And initially, this PTR is running a pre-patch state, and we plan to advance it to the first day of pre-patch for testing in a few days. Thereafter, they will continue to step the PTR forward through their intended pre-patch stages, and they'll test many world events, limited time dungeon bosses, Death Knight content, and other things. So all of the Wrath Classic stuff is ramping up aggressively. So be sure if you're wanting to hop in and test things that you're getting in there and doing it, because they're going to town. It's all getting available soon.
Yep, and it's PTR, so anybody can do it. You don't need access. You don't need to be flagged. You don't need a beta invite, whatever. It's in the client now. If you have an account in good standing, you can hop in there and you can PTR test Wrath Classic and participate in all the stuff that's going to be ramping up over there as they get ready for launch. I mean, we know that Wrath Classic comes out on September 26th globally, but also that means that pre-patch has got to be soon, right? Probably 2-3 weeks out from that, because they probably want to give pre-patch about a month. Then again, I guess they only gave Burning Crusade pre-patch about 2 weeks, right? So maybe it'll be a little bit shorter, but I feel like Wrath pre-patch is so much more to do, because you are going to have Death Knights unlock, and you're going to have the invasion event stuff. And so, yeah, I don't know. I think it'll probably be sooner than later, especially with the changes we've seen to the PTR realm that kind of leads me to believe that we'll have a bit longer pre-patch than we had for Burning Crusade Classic. So, yeah, check that out if you are so inclined, because you don't need anything special to be able to access it at this point.
Yeah. With that, we're going to play a quick sounder for our patrons, and we'll be right back. Hi everyone, I'd like to take a moment to thank our patrons. They contribute a ton to our show and help us to improve on the content we create. Today I'm giving a special shout out to Arajian, Celian, Infark, Kapawi, Mibble the Mighty, Nick, and Shorel. Thank you! This sounder is for you. If you're trying to track down our Patreon, it's over at patreon.com/thestartingzone. You can check out all of our Patreon episodes there, and we always appreciate all the support we get. All those funds go back into the show, making the show better. We need to start commissioning stuff for Dragonflight, so we're going back into a fairly large spending phase when it comes to getting stuff set up for that. So that'll be interesting to see how all that goes. But that's the next step. And with that, there's no new patrons this week, but we still need to schedule our August events. So we will let you know as soon as possible when those are going to be taking place, and looking forward to chatting with everyone about their questions, and I'm sure comments about Season 4 and Fated stuff that will come up this month, because we'll have seen the whole rotation most likely by the time we actually do our episode. So that'll be fun.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, patrons, thank you for your support. This month, I mean, we're coming up on, I think just recently was like the 6-year anniversary of the last episode that we recorded with Mick. And then Mick put out a couple episodes on his way out. And so this month is 6 years since we took over full time week to week, and 5 years since we started up the Patreon. So thank you all who have stuck with us on this journey for so many years now. I mean, we're starting to catch up to Mick and Jesse at this point. I think. I mean, we passed 10 episodes, but in terms of tenure, I mean, it's it's starting to even out. And yeah, it's been a lot of shows over the years, and patrons make that possible. So thank you all for that. And yeah, by the time we do the August patron show, like, we're gonna have seen a big chunk of season 4. We've seen the whole Faded rotation, I'm sure. So, well, we'll see some more. Hopefully, we see some more tuning and stuff too.
Yeah.
So we can speak intelligently about the whole scope of what season 4 presents to us. And I mean, it definitely, like, I would say for me, first week, stronger impression than I was kind of fearing. I mean, there are obviously problems, but from my experience, I was like, oh man, I guess we're doing this. And then it turned out to be mostly good, and it does feel pretty nice to, like, just rip a high item level piece out of a dungeon and then go take it over to the Catalyst. So hopefully
that does feel very good.
Having that, having fun with it.
I definitely dig the pieces dropping at the end of dungeon and heading over to the Catalyst and converting it immediately. And yeah, I think I had 26 or 27 charges built up when this launched, so I've just chewed through a ton of those time's gone on, which has been great. So I felt really good about that. So yeah, no, I love that system. I definitely want the Catalyst system back. But yeah, thank you again, patrons. Definitely big thanks to all of you for supporting the show. We really appreciate it a lot. And if you've enjoyed this episode, consider leaving us a 5-star review over on your iTunes and Apple Podcast. They really mean a lot to us. They help boost us up those charts, and we're climbing towards some goals for 5 stars. So more of them are always welcome. We read them here live on the show. This one comes in from Hjortfotan in Norway, entitled Norwegian Fan. I hope I said your name right, and if I didn't, feel free to give me the pronunciation, because I love figuring that stuff out. This comes in saying, love listening to the Starting Zone. Perfect when I'm on my goat farm getting all my WoW info, and they are getting me hyped for the future of WoW. I love this. I love that you used a goat emoji for goat. I think that's fantastic.
For the farm? Yeah.
Yep. I dig that we have listeners all around the world, and thank you so much for listening. And Norway is one of the countries, actually, that's very high up on my list for visiting at some point. So I really wanted to get there at some point. So hopefully sometime in the next few years, I'll find my way over to Norway and do spend some time there and enjoy the beautiful wilderness that you all have there.
Yes, and I'm a big fan of Norway's black metal bands as well. So awesome to hear from people all over the world. And WoW is such a broad game, and people all over the world literally, like, have these experiences with it. It kind of creates this global community, and that's one of the things I love about it, and why I wanted to work on a show like this to begin with, is because of that element of it. So great to hear from you. Thanks for writing in, and glad you liked the show.
Yeah. That wraps up episode 535 of The Starting Zone. If you want to check out show notes for this episode or leave us a comment on the show, you can head on over to thestartingzone.com, the official website for the Starting Zone podcast. If you want to contact the show and leave us your feedback or ask a question, you can email us at thestartingzone@gmail.com, or reach out to us on Twitter, or you can join our Discord over at thestartingzone.com/Discord. You can hop in there, ask questions there, chat with us there, and we're more than happy to see more and more listeners heading into that area. After we mentioned the mail carrier group that sort of formed in there, more and more people have joined with that profession, so I think that's awesome. I love supporting all of our listeners, and I think it's neat when you guys can come together and share your experiences, and in some cases have your own little private discussion group about gripes about your job. I think that's fantastic. So
we're getting close to the all mail carrier raid team.
That's right.
I think
yeah.
That's what I want for them, is to have a faded raid before season 4 is over. Just 10 player mail carrier raid.
Yeah,
that'd be awesome.
Yeah. If you want to get your hands on some TSE gear, you can find that over at TeePublic. That's teepublic.com/stores/The Starting Zone. Check out all the designs you can get on everything from shirts and mugs and stickers. And Jason, where can folks find you on the internet?
Best place to find me, as always, is over on Twitter. You can find me over there at Shieldwald. always talk whenever I'm doing around WoW and other stuff. And you can find me streaming WoW over on twitch.tv/Shieldwall. Streams are Tuesday, Wednesday, Sunday night for Raid and Keystones. I've been doing alpha stuff on Monday nights. All streams start 7:30 Eastern. Mondays sometimes start a little bit later. Last night we ended up doing a bunch of keys and then played a little bit of alpha, but it was season 4 kickoff and we got to get our keys in because we got goals to meet. So it was fun though. I mean, doing a little bit of both. I think, when there's this much stuff going on, that's what we got to do sometimes. But that's the basic raid schedule. So come check it out if you want to watch a stream.
Yeah. If you're trying to find me, you can find me over on Twitter at Spencer_Downey, or you're over on Twitch at twitch.tv/SpencerHD. I was streaming our Faded raids last week. I didn't stream last night because it was going to be a short night as is. Last night we did a Sylvanas sale for gold, and then headed into Nathria and killed Sludgefist, and then we were done. So there wasn't like a ton going on there. But you can catch me over there on Twitch every now and then doing my streams. And with that, for Jason and myself, we want to say thanks for listening, and jobs done.